Okay, so I'm now going to review solving right triangles. Now the word solving means to find all sides and all angles. Okay, and you would have done this in year 10, so this is just a refreshment of what you know. Okay, so first of all I'm going to concentrate on finding sides and then I'll do finding angles. Okay, now when we are finding a side, we need to, of course, remember our ratios. Sine of an angle is opposite divided by hypotenuse, cos of an angle is adjacent divided by hypotenuse, and tan of an angle is opposite divided by adjacent. And you need to remember which ones are which. So I always start with labelling the hypotenuse first, which is opposite the right angle. Then if you're looking from the angle x, the side opposite that, we call the opposite. In other words, if you actually draw angle x, you'll find that the opposite is the only side not touching the x. And, well, the adjacent one is the one that's left, or in other words, it's the one that touches the angle with the hypotenuse. Okay, that's the adjacent side. Okay, so first thing that we do is we work out which sides we need to find. And in this case, I should have a little degree sign, we need to find this one and this one. So this one is the opposite side and this one is the hypotenuse, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to concentrate on finding the opposite side first. So I need a rule that has the opposite side in it. I also need to have the rule with something that I know. So I know the adjacent. So if I want to find the opposite and I know the adjacent, the only rule that I'm going to use is tan. So I write the rule. Tan of theta or x, whatever you want to call the angle, is opposite over adjacent. I then put in the numbers. So the angle is 30 degrees. The opposite side I don't know what it is, and the adjacent is 12. I then use my algebra to get the opposite side by itself. So I multiply by 12 on both sides. And on this side I've got 12 multiplied by the tan of 30. That's what I actually do on my calculator, making sure that I'm in degrees. 12 multiplied by the tan of 30. And that gives me 6.93. And the units are meters. Okay. Now I actually have to find the hypotenuse. Now that one's a little bit trickier, okay, because I can either use my adjacent side or I can use my newly found opposite side. I always go with the one that I've been given. So I want something that uses the adjacent and the hypotenuse, which is the cosine. So I write cosine. I write the angle as being 30. Adjacent is 12. And the hypotenuse, I don't know what it is. Now this is a little bit tricky because I can't get rid of that 12 first. It's a little bit difficult. So what I've actually got to do, this is a two-step process. I've actually got to multiply both sides by the hypotenuse first, okay, which gives me this, which is no good because I still don't have the hypotenuse by itself, but then I have to divide by cos of 30, okay? So the hypotenuse actually equals 12 divided by cos of 30. Now that's a little bit tricky. So basically when the unknown is on the bottom, it ends up being a divide with the ratio on the bottom. So just remember that because that's a bit tricky when the unknown side is on the bottom of the fraction. So now I go 12 divided by cos 30. And the answer is 13.86. And I want to actually just check that that makes sense. Is this the longest side? If this is 12 and this is 6.9. Yes, the hypotenuse is the longest side. So I'm just checking the reasonableness of my results there. Okay, so that's how we find sides. If the unknown's on the top, we do a multiply. If the unknown's on the bottom, then it ends up being a divide. Okay? Now I'm going to do finding angles. All right. Now, when we're finding angles, we use a similar process, but the buttons are different on our calculator. Okay. The first thing that we do when we're finding an angle is we name the sides. So this one is the opposite, this one is the hypotenuse, this one is the adjacent. Now, obviously, I've got the hypotenuse and the hypotenuse and the opposite. So that involves the sine ratio. So I write my rule. Sine of A equals opposite over hypotenuse. Okay. Now, I want to get A by itself, so I have to get rid of sine. Now, this is not multiply. Lots of people think it is, but it's not. So I've actually got to use a very clever thing on my calculator, and the little symbol is this. And what that means is inverse sine. Okay, inverse is another word for opposite. Opposite of sine, okay, or inverse sine. There's no multiplier or anything involved there. So all I do on my calculator is I go shift sine, okay, because that accesses that little button there, so you see that that's inverse sine, and I put in brackets 15 divided by 22, and then I press the equal. So what it's saying is I want the angle that has a ratio of this, and it gives me 42.99. Now, because my calculator is in degrees, my answer is in degrees. Okay, so that's how we find angles. And there are some questions that you can do there just as a bit of practice. There's also exercise for A, B, and C. Go through some of those questions until you know what you're doing. Okay.